so in this video I'm going to talk about what kind of paint we're using and how to mix it. Alright, so we're using acrylic paint, and this is paint that you can dilute in water, but for the purposes of what we're doing, we're going to dilute it with a couple things. We're going to dilute it with Windex, first of all. Now, it doesn't have to be the brand Windex, but it has to be something very similar. Let me see what the ingredients are. Are there any ingredients on here? Windex Original Streak-Free Shine Glass Cleaner with ammonia. Now, you don't want to use anything that's advertised as a grease cutter or, you know, that's got extra ingredients in it. What you want is just standard glass cleaner. I've found some other brands that will work in Mexico. There's a brand called Golden Hills, which worked fine, and some of the other brands didn't work fine. If you find that the paint that you're using has like lots of spots in it, then there's probably something wrong with what you're mixing it with. Okay, so Windex we're going to mix with, and we're also going to use opaque base and transparent base. Now what these are is these are really cheap. I get them from TCP Global, and things that you can mix the paint with which will not diminish the texture of the color. It'll stay thick. This is much thicker than the Windex. So if you want a thicker paint, you want to use these for mixing. Mostly I end up using Windex, but I'm going to show you all the different variations. These opaque base and transparent base will be very useful later for certain effects, especially watery effects and some things to do with land. They help you create different kinds of textures, a little bit different than the Windex. Alright, so this is airbrush paint. This is acrylic paint. Basically what this is just acrylic paint from a tube mixed with something like these two things and made very fine, ground up very fine. Now, because it's ground up so fine, it doesn't clog the airbrush nozzles so much. But because we're not using the fancy airbrushes so much, we're using like the really cheapy ones. We don't have to have the specialized airbrush paint, although this is very convenient and nice to use. It actually ends up costing about the same as the same amount in a tube. So it's not a bad deal, the airbrush color. But if you can't get your hands on that, most art stores will have just regular artist's color. Now I'm showing you two different kinds. This is Liquitex Basics. Liquitex Basics is a brand that is very cheap. I use Liquitex Basics stuff for a lot of the stuff that we're going to do. It's very inexpensive paint, and you can get a large amount for pretty cheap. And the reason that is because it's mixed up with a lot of artist media, and it's not a high pigment load. More expensive colors like this Winsor Newton Gallery acrylic, it has more pigment in it. So if you were to mix this and this with the same amount of Windex or medium, you would get a more concentrated color with this. Now most of the time it's fine to use these, you know, it's nice actually to have a little bit of a transparency color at times, but sometimes you want a really concentrated color that's thin, and that's when you want to use the more expensive. Mostly for black is when you need the more expensive ones. Alright, so of the airbrush colors, there are a bunch of different kinds. We have opaque colors, and opaque colors are opaque. Let's see. You can't really see through them very well. And transparent colors are transparent. You can see through them. Let's find a different transparent. Here's a transparent blue. Here's a transparent green. I think you'll be able to see it. Kind of transparency. And opaque colors. Oh, that's too much. Don't So they have a different look. But when you spray these on, you can see a lot of difference. Like this will fill the space and cover up what's underneath it, and this won't. This will only kind of shade what's underneath it. Okay, so there are those two kinds of colors, but there's other kinds too. There's pearlized colors, which have kind of a shimmer to them, kind of a little bit like metallics. And they're pretty opaque. Here's a pearlized gold. Pretty colors. And then there's this thing called iridescent, which is just a very pretty color. I'm not sure exactly what the difference between those and pearlized is, but there's something very subtle about these iridescent colors. I really like them. So all of those are useful when you're painting. But if you can't get your hands on airbrush colors, and even if you can, it's nice to be able to mix your own colors. You can use just regular, this is Liquitex Basics, so I'm going to show you what that looks like when you mix it, and this is a higher pigment load Winsor Newton Burnt Sienna. So let's make some paint with these. So here I have a bottle. This was an agave bottle, but I finished my agave, and it's got a squeeze top, and that's what we want. So the first thing we're going to do, well, you make sure this is a nice clean bottle, and you're going to get some pantyhose. Now, why pantyhose? Well, they make a great filter. You can use this to filter out dried paint, filter out globs of paint. So cut a small piece of stocking. You don't need too much. And stretch it across the top. So that's going to work, okay? So we've got that ready. Now, let's make this one Winsor Newton Burnt Sienna. So I'm going to squeeze as much of this as I want into there. So there's about a little over a tablespoon of paint in there. And then take your Windex and spray as much as you need of Windex into that paint to make it a thick, milky consistency. You don't want it to be too thin. Milk is a little bit too thin. You want to leave this a little bit thick because you're going to further mix it when you paint with it. So I've got a bunch of Windex in there, and now I'm going to shake it up. Let's see what kind of consistency we get. I can't tell you exact measurements because every paint that you're going to buy is going to have a different amount of liquidness. So you need to be able to judge it yourself. Let's see what we've got. Squeeze out a little bit. Alright, so that's pretty good. That's about where we want it. So I'll put the stocking across the top. And now we can airbrush with that. Now that may not work really well with the fancier airbrushes, but it'll work fine with the Harbor Freight, and it'll work fine with the Master Single Action from TCP. Alright, so that's another color. Now let's try another one. Let's see the difference between, this is a low pigment load. So this used to be a bottle of chili sauce, and it's going to be a paint bottle. So I'm gonna make this whole tube. Squeeze it in there. This is kind of a bright leafy green. Okay, again, I think I've got about 2 tablespoons of paint in there. So I'm going to put enough Windex in to make it a thick, milky consistency. Let's shake this up and see how we're doing. So you notice this paint is actually thicker than this paint. This paint is more liquidy, but this paint is more transparenty. And that's because the Basics brand has medium in it already. It's not a high pigment load. So this is good. Let's put some stocking on it. Good piece of stocking. And that'll filter out any globs. Alright, so we've got green, and we've got brown. So these are some other colors that I've made from acrylics in a tube. And I got these on sale, like a whole bunch of these little hand sanitizer bottles. And they worked really well. I've got my stocking on top and got my colors in here. Alrighty. Now let's see what these do. So I'm going to mix this one into a Harbor Freight one. Let's use some of this brown. So I'm going to pour some into my little thingy. I'm not going to pour too much because I'm going to further mix this. I'm going to further dilute it. Now I want my texture to be kind of milky. And the reason I don't do that in the bottle is because when I'm done with this, I'm going to pour it back in there with more Windex to clean out so I don't waste any paint. Alright, so let's see what this looks like. Connect up my Harbor Freight brush. Turn my airflow back on. Alright, let's see what we've got. So that's our amber color. That's our brown color. You can mix this even more if you want. If you want it a little thinner, just add more Windex. This is really up to you and your preferences. It depends what you're going to paint, whether you're going to be using thick paint or thin paint. So you get much more of a transparency effect with more Windex. Alright, so let's mix some of that green into here. And we're going to thin it with some Windex even more. Now, I'm not giving you exact amounts because this is a preference thing. That's how you like it. So you need to do some experimenting. And let's try it with our airbrush.